Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Friday Rewind episode here every Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. My name is Chris Milicinos. I am the principal evangelist for the video games industry here at AWS, and thank you so much for spending your Friday afternoon with me on Rewind, where we look at video games industry's past to understand video games industry's future. And on this episode of Rewind, we have a very special guest, Van Burnham, who basically states that she is an author, a curator, and an arcade rat. So she's Supercade, which is her company, is founded by Van, who was a former Wired contributing editor. And Supercade is dedicated to the rich history of interactive entertainment, preserving the arcade golden age of the 70s and 80s with the Supercade collection, one of the most significant private collections of vintage video arcade games in the world, and chronicling the content, context, and aesthetics of the medium through world-class exhibitions. And more than that, she is just an awesome retro arcade nerd, just like myself, and I'm so thrilled that we have her on the program here. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and welcome Van up here. Van, are you around? Van, oh, there's Van. Oh my goodness, a couple of air horns, some kids cheering. Van, let me unmute your mic and hey, how you doing?
Hi, Chris.
Welcome. Good.
To see you.
Doing much better now that we have a chance to go ahead and sit down and talk to you. Let me go ahead and stop that audio and let's just play a little soft, casual nerd game music in the background for
I'm
us.
I'm gonna need a copy of your soundtrack. I think we need to do a pressing of your background music. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and even a louder coin for that one. So, Van, thank you so much for coming in and spending the this hour with us this afternoon on Friday. So it looks like
I'm so excited. This is the best way to spend a Friday, in my opinion.
Awesome. Oh, well, wait till we get to dig into all the work that you've done. I'm so excited to talk about it. Your contribution, the work that you've been doing over the years. But before all of that, let's talk a bit about your journey into video games and your background there. So you were contributing editor to Wired magazine, right? Way back in the day. Did that align with kind of your passion around video games, or?
It absolutely did. I was working for a magazine in New York City and went out to San Francisco to visit a boyfriend and managed to get an introduction and a tour of Wired. I had been corresponding with someone on staff there and came over for lunch and got a full tour. And at the end, they opened up a door and a bunch of editors had abandoned their desks and were in what was the media room playing at that point what was a new Nintendo 64, and they were all playing Mario Kart. And I was a lifelong gamer and had a retro game set up at my apartment in New York City, and just seeing all the editors in there playing games, I was like, this is obviously where I need to be. And within 2 weeks I had a job there and moved to San Francisco. So gaming was a huge part of me even going to Wired.
Yeah.
And this was before there was a games editor. So I was kind of the de facto, games evangelist on staff, just constantly pushing to get more video game content into the magazine, whether it was reviews or trying to get features. And, the impetus for Supercade, I was trying to get some stuff in the book and then just realized that I had to do it as a separate book because it was just so much content, and that's kind of what spiraled into the original Supercade.
So, what I find fascinating about that? So the thing that really drove you into focusing on video games was discovering your colleagues playing did you say it was Super Nintendo or Nintendo 64?
Oh no, I was already heavy into games, but just seeing that people on staff there were gamers, and that was a part of the culture there, that was really important to me. And I mean, this is early. I mean, this was like 1995.
Yeah.
When I first went out there, and it's like, you have to understand, like back then, like there was no retro gaming
That's
culture.
right. It was just
exist.
gaming.
I think, yeah, it was. I tell the story in the introduction of the first Supercade, but when I got my first apartment in New York, my family brought up a bunch of boxes of my stuff that was in the attic, including, a box that had all my old game systems from when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, oh my God, I hadn't seen this stuff in years. And I set it all up. So I had, an Odyssey 2 set up in my apartment with all the old games. And I had a Sega Genesis set up that we were playing Mortal Kombat on. And,
because that's the one
that's
the one that would
like
show blood, right? That's
trying to find a community around that. I had a Pipeline account. I had, this was early days of the internet. So I was like scanning in the manuals and the box art from like the Odyssey. And I had a little page online where I was posting all this Odyssey stuff. And this was like, there was like 2 other sites that had any other, classic game content.
Right.
And that's kind of where the archiving and the collection really started. And it's like, wow, I have a job now, I have money, I can afford to buy all the games that I didn't have as a kid. Started figuring out which game shops had old games, and just starting to share that information with other people that I met online that were into games. And like that was just the formative ooze of what is now this incredibly powerful retro gaming community around the world. It's just amazing to me to see how far all of that has come in the last what is that, 35 years.
Yeah.
But
well, I think too, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure, well, I shouldn't say I'm sure you feel this way, I'm going to ask you if you feel this way. We, growing up in the era of first video games, we knew that there was something more to these, these games that we were engaged in, because they drove all kinds of crazy behavior, right? It was your friends getting together to go in and play, and deep diving into reading and exchanging, information or tips, or, these secrets with each other on playgrounds. And it was just, there was no formalized way to kind of throw your arms around the entirety of what video games were. It's just kind of all these swirling bits around you. The internet really allowed for us to kind of coalesce all of those different facets of video games, our love for them, the communities around them, information dissemination, like all of these things. But before then, we were kind of just spinning, right? And they meant so much to us as kids that it was impossible to not have something to do with them as we became adults, right? And as we decided to make our way into tech and choose what we wanted to cover, to preserve, to, right, continue to build our careers in. It's all of those things.
It's incredible, that shared passion. And I think about this a lot, and it's like when I was a kid, I was a total tomboy, riding BMX bikes and playing with Star Wars, and I'd go to the arcade, but it wasn't about just the fact that I enjoyed playing the games. I mean, I loved the games, but it's like I just had this overwhelming feeling like this is important. What's happening, these games, like there's something important, bigger than just whatever's happening in this moment. And I felt really compelled, even as a kid, to kind of document the new games. And I paid a lot of attention of who made the games. And I just had this sense that this was something not just important to that moment in time, to popular culture, but that this was something that was important for the future and for technology. So I was really instilled with that from the very beginning, and just always paid attention to, what was happening in the game industry. And that's really the foundation that all of my work was built on. And it's amazing that, working in the industry these past 20 years, I've been able to meet so many kindred spirits who had a similar experience to me. People like you and Mike and Chris Charla and like all these people who have built careers around that same shared passion, and it's been amazing.
It is amazing. It reminds me when we think about the impact that video games had and may have had in ways we didn't fully understand. Obviously, we didn't at the time, but even as we were, again, kind of building our careers and moving into the space. When I was at Sun Microsystems, I eventually became the chief gaming officer over there and focused on making Java like really good and performant for game development. And I had several different shows I used to do for the company. One was called Level Up, which every time I start this show, I got to be careful. I'm like, welcome to Level Up. No, it's not Level Up anymore. It's Rewind. But I'm
going to have to find the archives of that. I need to watch that.
Goodness.
I haven't seen that show, Chris.
They are out there with frosted tips and blue glasses, and it's a thing. It is a thing.
I'm gonna have fun this weekend finding that.
But the cool thing was I had the chief science officer from Sun Microsystems, John Gage, on to interview him, and he said, back when Sun Microsystems was first starting, there was this little company in the valley called Atari. And we were all looking at it going, how the hell is this the fastest growing computer-based industry in the United States? And he said, so we looked to what Atari was doing to kind of emulate that same type of culture, that same type of, move fast, break things, type of thing. So video games have had a tremendous impact on virtually every foundational part of technology forward to and it will shape the way we do things like educate and teach civics and explore art and story and everything else. And that is so much of what Supercade is about, right? Preserving those things in the past, telling those stories about how they came into being and their impact going forward. And I love the work that you do. So what I'd love to do is take our audience on a journey through a bit of what Supercade is, the work that you're doing now. And if you're cool with that, why don't we go ahead and jump directly over into the Supercade website and have a poke around.
Oh, sure.
All right.
It's the thesis of the original book really was the impact that games have had on all of technology and digital culture. I mean, it really was the spark point for so many creative minds pioneering tech today. You can't talk to someone in the tech industry that doesn't have a story about, being interested in computers so that they could program their own games or play some game. And it's like, it really was an entry point for so many people to become inspired and move technology forward. So, my whole advocacy through the entirety of my career has been, really showing people the impact that games have had and how important it is as a medium. And it's kind of hard to remember, but back in the 90s, there was still this mentality that games were just kids' toys.
Yep.
And, that's what I originally started railing against. Like, no, games are an art form, that should be taken as seriously as film or music.
Yep.
And, in the beginning, that was a hard argument to make. It was not easy to get people to see that. And things have come so far. And, when these announcements come through, like, oh yeah, no, games are now included in the permanent collection of MoMA. And, there's an exhibition at the Smithsonian, it's like that. These were watershed moments in games being taken seriously.
Yeah.
And, I think it's still a battle on some fronts. I've been working in a number of different arenas, and a couple years ago, I was really trying to get a museum show mounted, and there still is a huge bias in some little pockets of culture against games.
Yeah.
I think, the film industry, things are finally starting to break down a little bit.
I know.
But
And
for
this year,
years-
especially with the type of movies and television that we've gotten that's built on video games, it's no longer video games as a throwaway promotional piece, right, for the movies. These stories stand on their own.
That has been a long time coming. I remember taking a meeting with some studio executives when I first got to LA, and their attitude was just like, games are such a niche audience. Why would we be interested in this? I'm like, the gaming audience is bigger than any audience you are currently engaging with.
Well,
you just don't understand.
All right. So here's what I'll say to that too, right? Is it's because everybody plays. Playing is part of our shared culture, right? For all of recorded history. And so video games are just another evolution of something that is central and core to being a human being. And we're not the only animals that play to discover our world and discover, where we sit within those societies, right? Pack animals play games to understand how to survive, how to work together, how to hunt together, these sorts of things. We use game theory in everything from business and finance to military. And, I would whenever I was, kind of confronted with video games and violence and so on and so forth, right? And the argument I always give that stops people in their tracks is, just like every movie is not The Godfather, not every video game is GTA. Because this medium, this art form, has the ability to tell any story we've ever had across the entire continuum of human existence. And we're just getting started. We're only 50 years young right now. And if that didn't go ahead and satisfy that curiosity for people, I would frame this. I'd say, what if I said that we're going to build a game that teaches your kids how to play a game of war, where the entirety of the game is about battle and pushing your opponent into absolute submission by the end of the battle? Would you let them play? They're like, no. I said, well, why wouldn't you let your kids play chess? Why wouldn't you do that? Because that is exactly what chess is. It is not about destroying everything on the board. It is about dominating, right? It's about submission. And when you frame it that way, then people go, okay, well, maybe I'm not looking at this in the right lens, right? And so again, as we think about the potential for games, they deserve our attention because they're not something you can experience on the surface. It requires our attention. It requires our navigation through their narratives to understand the intent of designers, the intent of the story, and to find our own meaning within them. And I think that's why it's the greatest art form we've ever had.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not even...
I'm sorry, what do you all think? Yes? Oh, yes, yeah. Okay, we have all these cheering people. Oh, and a little bit of applause and some air horns behind that, too. All right, I'll stop that. Sorry, Van.
Yeah, it's not just about the game itself and the interaction. It's the entirety of the technology that's built around it. And I think that, like you said, we're only 50 years young. Imagine what we're going to be capable of doing in another 50 years, in 100 years.
Agreed.
And I think we're going to start to... I think some secrets to the nature of the universe are going to be found in game code somewhere, because I think we're really just starting to get to, the very nature of reality and where it crosses over with simulation. And, all of these things are rooted around, the development process of making games. And I think that there's a lot still to be discovered there. And,
awesome.
It's like there's an import beyond just the medium as an entertainment medium. I think that, there's just so much to be learned and discovered about reality itself.
All right, so let's go ahead and take a question here from somebody in the chat. So this is their first time chat. So thank you. I think it's Cerise 16384. So Van, since you're talking about games as art, I wonder how you felt about Roger Ebert finally switching his viewpoint that games could be art on the basis of cosmology of Kyoto. Now, I also would say that you and I are both friends with, you know, with with I think, was it Kelly Santiago or Jane Pinkett? I think it was Kelly Santiago, right? That made the statement that video games are art that that Roger Ebert took issue with, right? And then of course he came back and said, well, look, you know, it's really not my, you know, my medium. So maybe what I said is I don't understand how it could be art.
Well, he's of course polluted by the bias in the film industry that has existed for a very long time, and you know, it's like dissecting that and getting to the core of it. You know, is it jealousy that, you know, the games industry, you know, increased 25% while the film industry tanked during the pandemic? You know, is it just you know, is it financial? Is it emotional? You don't know where these biases are coming from. So I mean, he comes from the film world, so there is an ingrained bias there.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, as things evolve and games become viewed as more legitimate entertainment, you're going to see a lot of people who had taken those stances have to adjust their views slightly to fit, you know, an accepted narrative.
Yep.
So it's not surprising that he would alter course a little bit, but you know, it's a welcome change for sure.
You know, I will say that, you know, there was an article that came out after, you know, the Art of Video Games launched in Washington, D.C. in 2012. And it was George Lucas and Steven Spielberg talking about, you know, how that movies really are the best art form, like games really are an art form. And somebody had asked me, you know, what I thought of that. And I said, look, you know, they are geniuses and they have every right to be wrong on this. That's okay. It's okay to be wrong sometimes. And in this case, they happen to be wrong. It doesn't take away anything from the work that they've done. It just, in this case, it's not a medium that they necessarily grew up with or embraced and wasn't fully understood, but we're starting to see that now. So with all of that, why don't we go ahead and jump into, before we jump into your books, which when you were talking about the people that influenced you, I want to talk about how you influenced me. So before we do that, I want to talk a bit about what Supercade does here. So maybe you could tell our audience a bit about the different work that you're doing with, like, for example, Arcadia.
Yeah, well, Arcadia was a series of exhibitions that I did with Soho House. And we're working on another one that will hopefully be happening again here in LA. It kind of got sidelined by the pandemic. We were getting ready to do one in New York City when the pandemic hit. So we're still in the process of spinning that up. But that was, you know, I've done a couple of exhibitions, and that one was really special to me because I thought it was an interesting opportunity to reach an audience that wouldn't normally get exposed to classic games and the history of games that way. You know, Soho House is a private members club that, you know, has a lot of celebrities and, you know, business and influencers who are constantly in and out of there. And it was really exciting to see how positive a response there was to that show. So the way that was structured, it launched at the West Hollywood House, and I had a gallery and took over what was the billiard room, and I showcased a series of prints by the photographer Iro Nowinski, whose collection is housed at Stanford now. He was a photographer for the San Francisco Opera and did some really important photojournalism back in the late 70s. And around the time that the arcade phenomenon hit in the early 80s, he also had this sense that this is something important that needs to be documented. So he went around to various arcades and amusement piers in around the Bay Area and shot photographs of just kids and people playing games in black and white. And it's one of the best documents that we have. And the basic thesis of the Arcadia show was pointing out the diversity endemic to the gaming community. Because when you look at these photographs, it is not, the stereotypical, 20, 30 something overweight basement dwelling troll that people associate with, gamers, for whatever reason. How that trope even evolved, I don't completely understand.
Yeah.
Because when you look at these photographs, it's young boys, it's young girls, it's teenage boys, it's businessmen, business women, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, like everybody came together to play games. It was the most inclusive thing that you could possibly imagine. And it's not until you go really look in these photographs and see who was there playing games that you realize this is a complete cross-section of humanity, that this is not dominated by, white guys or, whatever people assume was the, the stereotypical, view of gamers. And it's like, we're finally getting back to that.
And so look, I love what you're talking about. So these are the black and white photos that you said are housed at Stanford, right? Is that Henry Lowood's collection?
Yeah, Henry Lowood is the curator there, and he was very generous to let me use these images for the exhibition. I blew them up, really
They're beautiful.
Big for this gallery.
Van, they are beautiful, and I've used some of them in presentations, and there's one specifically for my favorite arcade game, which was Robotron 2084, and there's a wonderful close-up of a young man playing the game. But this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Everybody plays. But what arcades did is they also created this incredibly unique social space, right? Where you could have two adult men of two different backgrounds, literally standing physically shoulder to shoulder in front of a control panel. They may never even speak to each other, but playing against each other, and they dissipate. Like if you did that to somebody in an elevator, right? Or in a bar, like that's when fights start. But in the arcade, everybody was there for this shared experience that sat adjacent to our reality, right? Because they were these universes behind glass that we were engaged with. And when we finally saw, Pac-Man come on the scene in the very early, 1980s, 80s, all of a sudden we saw women coming into arcades. We saw that whole mix of people coming in, character-based games that really spoke to a wider audience. And it all happened so fast, right? It just happened really so faster than any other form of expressive media.
It was like lightning. So for the exhibition there was maybe about a dozen of the prints on display, and then I took the games that were featured in the photos, and then I brought those out of the collection. Most of them were featured. There was a couple of special things that were also on display. But, so there was a really great shot of a kid playing a cockpit Red Baron. So then I had a cockpit Red Baron there, so people could actually play the game that they saw in the photographs. And
that Red Baron,
it was really fantastic. So
as Cerise said in the chat, the selection of games for Arcadia that you're showing there are straight up fire. Now that Red Baron that you have there, obviously looks very much, and of course is taken from the pole position, right? Cockpit, shape and form.
Well, Red Baron came first, so the pole position cockpit was actually based on the Red Baron.
So as a preservationist, I think you and I have had some discussion around this before. My wife had gotten me a original pole position cabinet for a birthday one year, but it needed to be gutted, and even though it looks, because since 82, barf, beer, gum, right? The cigarette burns. You couldn't restore some of it.
It's one of the most notoriously difficult boards to maintain. So
yes.
High challenge.
That's right. So what I did is I gutted the whole thing, took it all apart, recut all of the primary panels, found
wow.
somebody online who redid all the artwork in vinyl, so everything was brand new. But you can see, like on that Red Baron, how it looks like it's two pieces, but you and I know that it's really one piece. But for somebody to move, I mean, that machine's got to be 350 pounds.
You can unbolt them and separate the back from the front. It's
yes,
just, you know,
but that whole,
it's not easy to do.
And the whole floor is one piece, right? So even if you unbolted the back from the front, you still had to kind of disassemble that. So when I rebuilt it,
there's a piece of plywood that goes.
That's right.
That bridges the two pieces.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I did was I modified it when I rebuilt it to put lag bolts underneath, and I made the top hinged. So when I needed to move it, I could literally snap it into two complete pieces, move it, reassemble everything, and it was pristine and perfect. And then eventually I wound up basically giving it away to a guy who runs a youth group, and they teach kids about old video games and everything else. So it was wonderful to have it kind of fall into his hands. All right, so real quickly, because I want to make sure we have enough time to jump into your books. Tell me about your collection that you pulled out of Arcadia. How many systems do you currently own at Supercade?
God, I haven't. I'm doing an inventory right now of the home consoles, so I don't have an accurate count of that. The arcade games, there's just around 400 in the collection now. So
that's awesome. And somebody from the chat here, another first time chatter. So thanks for showing up here today. What was the name of the photographer again? So they can go ahead and look up that photographer's work.
Ira Nowinski.
Ira Nowinski. Yes. Yeah, really amazing stuff.
Ira Nowinski. Maybe you can put that up in the chat somewhere.
Yeah, so let me see. Ira, how do you spell it? Nowinski?
Nowinski.
Look at that. I got it on the first shot.
If you look up Ira Nowinski Stanford, you can access the Stanford archives online and go through all of the photographs in their collection there. It really is incredible.
Yep, it really is. It really is. So, Van, I love that you have this whole collection. I know there's a bunch of stuff that you also work on, but what I want to do is take people through your books. I want to talk about how they also inspired me. So why don't we go ahead and jump on over and take a look at the Supercade books. Okay, so here are the two volumes, the first two, the only two volumes.
The red one is the original.
The red one. So this is my well-worn, right? I mean, I have to be careful when I'm showing it because
I'll bring you a new signed one the next time I get to see you, Chris.
That would be perfect. So, all right. So this was the first one. This was Supercade from 1971 to 1984. This is the visual history of the video game age, 85 to 2001. We're going to talk about this. This is the new one that just released, but I'm going to move this to the side for a moment. Book. And I want to talk about this one. So, back when I was talking to the Smithsonian American Art Museum about building the art of video games for them, this became one of the most important reference books that we used. Wow. And in fact, I brought this along with me, and this is not a light book, folks. Like, this thing is legit. This has got to be a 5-pound book. And so I had this in my bag along with, a bunch of other stuff, and I took it to a dinner where it was actually pretty awesome because we were awarded these medals of service by the Smithsonian for agreeing to do this work for them. And I took this book out at like every table. I'm like, if you want to understand why this stuff is so important, this is the book that sets that forward. And so what I want people to understand is, the care that Van put into the Supercade book in this format. You can see everything is done in these big, beautiful, photos, but with, well-placed and understood blocks of text here. I love that, video game, an electronic game played by manipulating images on a video screen. So yeah, that's pretty, that's pretty
to have the definition in there.
Yeah, and then this one, which I love, which is Eugene Jarvis, right? Famous Eugene Jarvis, one of the greatest game designers of all time, still runs the largest arcade company in the world, I believe, which is Raw Thrills Games. The only legitimate use of a computer is to play games. Yeah, so today, if you're ever at a movie theater or amusement park or something, you see big, giant video games, sit down and drive, look for Raw Thrills. That's Eugene Jarvis. Did Defender, again, my favorite game, one of the two guys, Robotron 2084. Amazing. But
I'll have to send you a picture. I finally got to, I corresponded with Eugene so many times over the years, but had never met him in person, and finally at DICE last year, he was there at the party, and I got to, hang out with him and take a photo, and it was a real moment.
So,
I've always been such a huge fan of his, and included that quote. And then he wrote, when the first book came out, he wrote the first review that was posted to Amazon and gave me 5 stars. And I was like, my work is done. I don't need the fact that he loved the book. Like, that's all that I cared about. That meant so much to me.
Oh yeah. Well, the first time I met him too, right? And that's the wonderful thing too. I don't know if you feel this way, right? And maybe this is, sharing a little too much about the inside, inside your own brain pan kind of thing. But we get to work and meet with people that, I mean, they're just like bigger than life for me. So I'm meeting my heroes by getting to work in this industry. When I met Eugene, it was at E3, and I told him, oh, huge fan, blah, blah, blah. This is what I'm doing. Oh, yeah. And I said, no, look. And I took out my iPhone, and my passcode at the time was 2084. And he reached over and planted one on my cheek, and then we just sat there and took this awesome photo together. And I'm like, that was amazing. But so this book here, again, you go back. I love Tron, of course, just incredible. And I love the fact you have Kevin Flynn stuff in there. But you go all the way back to the original games, right? Brookhaven National Labs with William Higginbotham doing Tennis for Two to help people become more comfortable knowing that one of the machines that was used in the Manhattan Project was now moving to residential area, which is right here, beautifully depicted in the book here.
Yeah,
and you go
all of that early history was so important to me, and that was really the inspiration for doing the book. There was a book that came out. I don't want to get into the name of it and the author, but this book kind of had this angle that the game industry started with Atari. And as impactful as Atari was, there was just so much pioneering work that occurred that led up to that. So I'm like, somebody really needs to showcase, that early history. So including all of that, the pioneering work done by Ralph Baer, the pioneering work being done at Brookhaven National Labs, at MIT, that it set the stage for what became the game industry. Yep. You can't really just start, the game industry started with Pong. It didn't play out like that. Like there was so much foundational development that happened that allowed games to ignite the way that they did. And really giving Ralph the credit that he deserved for all that pioneering work. And I was so grateful to have the opportunity. I flew out to New Hampshire and spent a few days with him and his wife and went through all of his archives, and all of the things that are pictured in the book, those were all scanned from his personal archives that he had. And I got to photograph the original brown box, and I wish that I could go back in time with an actual, photographer and camera crew and get even better documentation that I did, because there was just so much there.
All right. So here's how. So I had the chance to spend the day with him as well. And this was after his wife passed. And I got to play with him on the original 1965 brown box prototype, just like, I'm sure you did as well. And, Leonard Herman and a bunch of other historians have gone there to do it. But I got it all on video. And I have a clip of it up on YouTube of me playing with Ralph on his original prototype. And when I would do talks for like elementary schools or things like that, and I'd show up, these little kids would be like, why did you beat that nice old man at his game? I'm like, he was like 82, like the game I didn't even move, And but you're right, it didn't start with Atari. And it's kind of like when people say, oh, the metaverse, just like Ready Player One. It's like, no, that is not where that comes from. But this was the primordial time in games. It was saying, how could we not just observe this medium? How could we participate in this medium? And it was pioneers like Ralph Baer. It was pioneers like, the model train, the model railroad club
Steve
at
Russell,
MIT.
and just
Steve
everyone
Russell.
at the Tech Model Railroad Club.
Yeah.
I mean, just everything that they were thinking and doing, kind of just came together at this.
Look at how gorgeous this
perfect
is.
moment in time. Yeah, I think you saw a photo. I had a special guest over at the Supercade.
Yeah, we'll talk.
This week.
We'll have you back on to talk about that at another point. But yeah, this is absolutely beautiful. There's also a whole story about this particular model that they found to do the shoot. We'll save that for another time as well. But what I love about the book is that while it informs through the text in the book, I think it informs as greatly through the presentation of the materials. Like, for example, or the images. For example, this one, here's a party trick. If you ever want to go ahead and, ask people, I can tell you how to play an entire video game in 6 words. They were like, that's impossible. How are you going to do that? Avoid missing ball for high score. That was the entire instructions for Pong when it was first released at Andy Capp's. And the reason was they said, look, because people are going to be drunk. Like, you can't go ahead and put that many words there. Yeah. How can you simply describe how to play Pong? That's one of the stories that,
Nolan told. And it's, Computer Space was released. It's an incredibly beautiful and elegant game. And they made the mistake of play testing it at bars where engineers hung out.
Yeah.
Right. So the engineers got it and understood the game, and it did well. But then they started putting it on location where, just normal Joes were, and people couldn't figure out, the thrusting and the rotating and the shooting and the timing of it. And, it didn't translate to like a normal drunk in a bar, so that when they did do Pong, the whole point of it was we were going to do something just so simple and basic that you can describe it in 6 words.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
And it was a huge success as a result.
Right. And there's all the stories of it breaking down because too many quarters were in there and it jammed the mechanism, all that stuff. But what I love too, like, this is also the era, like, we didn't know what video games were and really who was going to be playing them. So we saw a lot of photos like this of, families, every principal unit, right, in the family, amazed at what was happening on screen. I remember there was an old Atari, and I'm not going to play this, of course. Right, which of course you have to play the Atari jingle anytime it's mentioned. But what it was, by the end of the commercial, there was like 15 people, including 2 grandparents, jammed on the sofa, and everybody screaming and raising their hands. I mean, they didn't know what was going on there.
I know the ad you're talking about.
Right, but we were trying to figure that out, and this book really just. When I first discovered this book is when I first met you. Oh, and all of the patches for Activision. We're going to have to do a whole Activision episode to talk about that, because we do have one of the original Activision guys working here at AWS in a sister team.
Who's that?
It is Steve Cartwright. Actually is over here as well. So we're going to have to go ahead and get Mr. Cartwright.
I had such a crush on Steve Cartwright.
Oh, I will have to let him. Isn't that right, everybody?
Because they had the pictures on the back of the boxes.
That's right. So this was the first book, and this one kind of really inspired me, because when we did the Art of Video Games, this was the book that I wrote for the Art of Video Games, and if you take a look, you'll see it follows a very similar format to the format that you created, Van. I was so impressed and taken by the way you not only described what was going on, but using the images to really tell the story, right? Like in the Afterburner one, one of my closest friends, he did all of the layouts of the book, and as we were discussing, it's like, yeah, but the thing with Afterburner was the whole horizon was tipping in real time, so we'll display that by aligning it this way, but then also showing kind of the rotation of this. So it's really
I love how you handled that. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. Using the visuals to tell the story as much as the text did. And then, of course, in between all of these, we would have, the interviews with different developers and musicians and artists, everything else. So when I say the work you did inspired many of us, me included, and that's why my book resembles the same format that yours. Oh, here's one of my favorite people of all time, RJ Michael. who is
Yes.
just extraordinary. Yeah, and I promised I would go ahead and play that. So here is RJ laughing for us. All right, we got a good RJ laugh, and we got this one.
Fantastic.
That's just wonderful.
Oh, it is wonderful. Thank you, RJ. I appreciate you, buddy. So anyway, so Van, your work inspired me and allowed me to go ahead and create something that I hopefully holds up, even just a little bit to the incredible work that you've done.
I'm honored to have it in my library, and that it means so much to me. But it's like it's hard to imagine, given the insane volume of video game books are available now. I tell the story in the introduction to the original book, but the very first genesis of the idea to do Supercade, when I started collecting classic games again and creating that community back in the early 90s, I went up to Rizzoli, which was the big bookstore on Broadway in New York City.
That was my publisher. Look at that.
So I went to Rizzoli, and I went to the information counter, and I said, oh, hello. Could you show me where the video game books are? And she looked at me like, what are you talking about? There are no video game books. I think the only two books that they had in their catalog was David Sheff's Game Over,
press start to continue.
Which is my absolute favorite book about the industry. It's just absolutely brilliant. And they also had a copy of Scott Cohen's Zap: The Rise and Fall of Atari.
Yep, both incredible books. But I want to tell you a story about Game Over. But go ahead. Finish. Just remind me. I don't want to forget telling you this awesome story.
Okay, I'll remind you. So I couldn't, whatever I was interested in, I always wanted to have a book, whether it was, an architect or a photographer or designer, whatever, the Memphis movement. Like, I wanted to have a book on whatever I was interested in. And I'm like, certainly somebody has done a book that shows all of these systems that I played as a kid and talks about these games. And there was nothing. And like within the next couple years, I think I found there were some other authors who had done some books. Leonard Herman had done Phoenix that I found online.
Yeah. The Rise
which
and
is
Fall.
a fantastic book, but it's a book, a black and white with some black and white, small little inset photos. And like, I imagined, a coffee table book, I wanted big pictures of the games and, just, interviews with the people who made them. And like, I just kind of had this idea in my head of like what this ultimate video game resource would be like. And then, after years of not finding it, I'm like, well, I guess I'm just supposed to do it. And I started working on the book when I got to Wired. So
and you did. And again, like I said, it kind of created the template for, I think, not just my book, for other books, to how to present this, because you can't tell the history of this visual and art medium without incredible art to accompany it, right? And that's what you've done here. All right, but let me tell you real quick about how interconnected our industry is and the people that love games here. So it was 2000. It was like February 2000, I think it was. And there was this one conference that was being held in California called the Game Executive Summit. I think it was done for maybe 1 or 2 years. That was the year that I met Peter Moore, who went on to right? He was the CEO of Sega America, and then of course went on to Xbox, and now he's over there at Unity. And of course, I'm not shy. So while he was on stage rehearsing for his presentation, I went up there, young, ignorant, just said, hey, before you continue rehearsing, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Chris Melicinos, blah, 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 blah. So I knew that this guy, Andy Eddy, was going to be at the show. And I brought my copy of Game Over, press start to continue, right? So Andy Eddy had done the abridged version of the book. And I wanted him to sign my copy so I could give it to the CEO of Sun Microsystems, Scott McNeely, right, as a gift, because Scott had given me my job to go do this, and I wanted to bring something back to him. Show happened, and we never, connected. All right, a few months later, I'm broadening my 3DO collection by buying some games on eBay. and I win a collection of 3 or 4 games. And the games show up at the house, and out come the games and 2 copies of the book. And I was like, what? And he had signed one to Scott and one to me. And he goes, look, my wife was selling off my 3DO collection on there. And I figured, how many Chris Melisinoses are there that would be collecting for this? And so he took a shot, threw the books in there. So every time I see him, it's nothing but hugs and laughs, because it's just kind of the universe saying, you all should be connected. Yeah, and we were. So,
that's incredible.
Oh my God.
No,
all right.
I've known Eddie a long, long time. He's a dear friend, and, just done so much incredible work. That's just such a fantastic.
All right, so let's take a look through your book. So here with you signing this to me. Thank you so much.
This is the new book.
This is the new book.
I'll tell you really briefly. So after the first book came out, which was, over 20 years ago for the softcover edition now, 20th anniversary for that one, people talked about, oh, are you going to do a sequel? And honestly, at that point in time, I didn't feel like the next era of games were relevant yet. It was too soon, so it's like we talked about it a little bit. I talked about it a little bit with the publisher, but it really took like some time to elapse before those games became classics in the same way that, the Golden Age games were.
Right.
And finally, last year, well, not last year, in 2020, I finally was like, you know what? I finally feel like the time is right to do this. I feel like, these games have now achieved the same level of significance as those early titles, if not, surpassed them. I think arguably some of these games are more impactful than even Pac-Man, or
they are. They can be. I think what's really interesting about the way art permeates society, right, is that you can be adjacent to it and understand its meaning without ever actually having engaged in it. So I love the fact that you can show this, round yellow dot with a wedge cut out to kids today, and they'll go, oh, well, that's Pac-Man, even if they don't have any, right, because it's part of the zeitgeist. But I love you start off this era with the Crash, right? And now I know that other game historians take a bit, will probably disagree with me a little bit, but the way I look at it too is, yes, there was a crash in the console game space, right? Because of the glut of content that existed out there. People don't know what.
And also the arcade space. I mean,
and the arcade started
here in the US. It was across the board,
right? But remember, at the same time is when the rise of home computing was happening. Commodore VIC-20, 64, Apple II. So it's not that we necessarily stopped playing; it's that we shifted where we were playing and the types of things that we were doing. But we also did it under the guise of, oh no, I can use this for my schoolwork and to learn math and stuff. Well, of course I'm going to learn math because I'm going to learn how to program my own games, right? So yes, but there was a commercial and cultural crash of games, and it took Nintendo to come back, create the Nintendo seal of quality, look at quality over quantity, really control how content made its way out there to kind of resurrect.
Yeah, it was just there was this Silicon Gold rush and just so much garbage.
Look at this.
We see this happens, and it's happened over and over and over again in the game industry, and it's like it's just amazing to me that the lessons have still yet to be completely learned.
Yeah, well, look, I know it's hard to read here because the camera's going to blow it out, but it's hard to believe. But a Japanese company says it intends to introduce a new video game machine in the United States despite the collapse of the video game industry here. Newswire, January 12th, 1985, right?
1985. So there really was. Games were dead.
Yeah.
Buyers for toy stores would not place orders. Like, nobody was going to sell video games anymore. And Nintendo coming in, the stories, I was very lucky to spend some time talking to Don James, who was an early employee, Nintendo of America, and integral to the launch of the NES. And just the attitude was basically like, Nintendo had to assume all of the risk.
That's right.
They basically gave all of those systems to FAO Schwartz and Macy's and everyone who had them for the launch, and said, you're just going to pay us for the ones that you sell.
That's right.
You know?
And that's super significant. I mean, most people don't understand this. And I'm so glad you brought that up. Nintendo was guaranteeing that if we are not going to let any of this stock sit in your warehouse or come out of your bottom line, if they don't sell, we will take them back. And of course,
you don't have to pay for anything that you don't sell. And that's the only way that they got the system launched.
That
was the only way that they got into retail stores.
Yeah.
But then look, that was a huge risk for them to take, and it paid off.
Oh, tremendously.
Thousandfold.
But as we talked about too, at that era, we were now moving into home computers. The Amiga 1000, could never afford one as a kid, but certainly have one now. And just really an incredible, once again, journey back through this next era of video games and their importance in society, right? In culture. I would also like to say, Van, for those that haven't seen these books, definitely go ahead and pick them up. They're available, I believe, through Amazon and fine bookstores that carry this.
The hardcover copies are only available on the Supercade site. So if you go to shop.supercade.com.
Shop.supercade.com.
Signed of the limited hardcover still available. There's not a ton left, though.
Then definitely get on that, because it is absolutely worth having. But what I wanted to say here too is,
I want to just breeze through some stuff because we're really running out of time. But I was so thrilled with how the new book came out. The new book, I was negotiating with the publisher of the original book for years, and we just could not come to terms until finally I was like, the hell, I'm just going to put this on Kickstarter and just, do it that way. And it was the best decision I ever made. The experience that I had interacting with the backing community and the contributions that everybody made, and the generosity of spirit, it was so rewarding for me. And the book became so much more than it originally was going to be, because of that contribution, because of that dialogue that I had with everybody. And I was just so thrilled with the final product. And I was, the campaign did well, so I was able to really, put all of the gatefolds in and the special colors, and just pull out all the stops as far as, the printing went. And, I added like 70 pages. So this book is even heavier and more deadly than
look at
the
how
original
gorgeous
Supercade in many ways.
All right, but let me tell you something. As somebody who backed this, even before, when I knew that this was coming on, I should also mention that Van had also approached friends that work in the games industry and preservation, including myself. I was deeply honored to be able to contribute. I'm going to flip to that. And Van was like, well, what system do you want to go ahead and cover? I'm like, Sega Saturn, of course.
Sega Saturn.
But here's the difference, is the way you engage the community. People wanted you to succeed with this, right? It wasn't the, when is this going to happen and how come this is here? Of course, you get a tiny bit of that. But by and large, I watched that community go, hey, when it is ready, is when we'll get it. Like, we are completely cool with that.
And it's like, there were some delays, and some of it was just inevitable because I was doing this during the pandemic, and when I was talking to vendors ahead of them actually getting paid, it was like, oh, of course this isn't going to be a problem. And then as soon as you pay them, it's like, oh, now we're going to be shut down for 3 months. So I navigated as best as I could, and I took the extra time to really polish the presentation and the content as much as possible, and having that extra time really made such a huge difference. I think there's 2 typos that have been found, like just there were so many things in the original book.
Hold on a minute. Those aren't typos. Those are Easter eggs. Like, if you found them, good job. Exactly, we got 10 Easter eggs.
Like there were so many things in the original book that I wished I could have gone back and done better. So the fact that I had the time to really perfect this one meant so much to me. But the opportunity is, and this is exciting, so I'm going to announce this for the first time, is that I'm working with Dynamite. We are going to do a remastered hardcover edition of the original book. So that's something that I'm working on right now, where we're going to go through and update some of the content and really enhance the imagery, and I'm going to put the gatefolds in, and make it just as spectacular as the sequel. So and people can have.
But if there's any other bits of
those hardcover copies of the original book are long gone, sold out, and some of them sell for hundreds of dollars online. It's ridiculous. So it'll be really fantastic to have hardcovers of the original.
Well, I cannot wait to get mine, and I know that we're running a little over, so I want to get through a couple of things. If I can get you for another 5 minutes.
I'm thinking we're going to have to do a part 2 of this because I didn't even get to talk about the museum. I didn't get to talk about all sorts.
And we are going to do that. We'll have
to do a follow-on where I just talk about the museum.
We are going to absolutely do it, but a couple things I want to point out here too. For example, like the Sega Genesis piece here was done by Blake Harris. Blake wrote the book Console Wars, right? Which is an amazing, amazing book, an amazing telling of how Tom Kalinske was able to go ahead and position Sega in the United States against Nintendo during the whole Sega does what Nintendo don't era. So the fact that you have people, like him in here doing this, of course, I need to get over to my section because I love, an interview with Richard Garriott. Can't have game history without him.
There's a lot more interviews in this one, and I wish that this book could have been 1,000 pages easily. I've joked that one day I'll do the Supercade encyclopedia where there's a whole book just A.
Well,
we'll do a whole set. I'll make a special bookcase for it.
I love it. I'm in. I can have an entire library like that as a dedicated piece of furniture in my house. I'm sure that would be fine. But we'll do
a subscription model where every couple months you'll get a new
book. Exactly right. You heard it here first. Van's going to be bringing back the Encyclopedia Britannica business model of game history. But this was the Saturn section that you were kind enough to let me contribute to, and I love the fact that you chose the kind of the ghost translucent one.
It was absolutely fantastic.
Thank you so much. So these are the Supercade books. They are worth every bit of money and time that you can pour into them to understand.
Spreads.
This here?
No, go back.
Let's see.
Full Throttle. Yeah. I'm a huge Tim Schafer fan, and getting to interview him for that was such a thrill. He also supported the campaign and was really honored.
Tim is absolutely amazing. So Van, I know again this hour blew by. I could spend 3 hours with you we could spend days.
You have to promise me we'll do another one when I have more to announce for the museum.
We absolutely 100% are going to do a part 2 here. So I want to thank you so much. Everybody, let's go ahead and give it up for Van. Yay! Thank you so much for spending your time with me, with us this afternoon on Rewind. Incredible work. Thank you so much for being so present and engaging and just share a passion for video games that I do too. I wish you nothing but the best, my friend, and thank you for spending time with us today.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you so much.
Hopefully we get to talk more soon.
100%. All righty, gang. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Rewind. Remember, if you are a game developer from AAA down to independent game developers, we have technology, solutions, and services that can help you in your cloud gaming journey. Make sure you head on over to aws.amazon.com/gametech to find out more information. And special thanks, of course, to Waterflame, who allows me to use his music here on Rewind and the other shows that I do on AWS's Twitch channel. Make sure you head on over to his YouTube channel at Waterflame Music. Check out the incredible catalog of music that he produces. And of course, if you care about video game history as much as Van and I do, make sure you head on over to the Video Game History Foundation to find out how this incredible 501c3 organization is preserving video game history for the future. I happen to be a founding board member of this organization and completely love the work they do there. So again, check out gamehistory.org to find out more information how you can help support the preservation of video game history for future generations. And that brings us once again to the end of this episode of Rewind. Thank you, everybody, for spending your Friday afternoon with me here. And of course, we do this every Friday afternoon, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. and I hope you have an awesome rest of your day, an incredible weekend, and we'll see you next week on Rewind.